Hey guys, thanks so much for pushing play. I have back on the line our good friend and all things gold and silver pundit, the media director over at Miles Franklin, Andy Hoffman, on the line. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing just fine. Showing yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing well too. I was listening to your interview with Greg Hunter. Well done. You're reaching more people than you've ever reached before, Andy, and I certainly hope it's making an impact because this dollar Ponzi, contrary to popular belief, is on its last leg. I was talking to my friend Rory today, who commented that every video from now on that we do should be titled "The World is Falling Apart," because people, he says, love fear porn, to which I said, it's not fear porn when it's true. The fear is real, Andy, and the world really is falling apart, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it was October 7th when I wrote an article called 2008 is Here. It was actually called 2008 is Here with one temporary exception. That temporary exception being the goosing, the PPT goosing of stock markets that mask it. And again, that's October 7th. Oil was still $80 a barrel. Things were already looking that bad around the world. That's when the ECB was starting to talk about QE, when Japan was starting to talk about expanding Abenomics. That was before the oil plunge. That was before Greece. That was before the euro plunge, before the Swiss franc thing, before all the economic data around the world, like the Baltic Dry Index plummets to all-time lows, all that kind of stuff. That was then. Here we are today, where literally the euro itself is on the verge of collapse. We're talking about, the Chinese bubble is bursting right in front of our eyes. U.S. economic data, with the exception of the most fraudulent employment report I've ever seen in my entire life, is showing the same thing. And, people are fearful. And that's why the dollar index has gone up. I said it 2 years ago. The dollar is going to go up not because the U.S. is strong, but because everyone is fearful, because they're just going to where the liquidity is, to the largest currency. And it's causing all these crazy, crazy deformations of the global economy that are only going to get worse.
Yeah, I want to talk about Greece, but before we do that, let's start with gold and silver, because as this paper Ponzi collapses and as the dollar gets stronger, gold and silver somehow magically, Andy, only become cheaper for those of us who hold dollars. And in many ways, when you're informed about the truth of how bad things are globally, it's a real gift because it allows us to buy precious metals much cheaper than I think they should be priced at. And you continue to make the note, Andy, that despite record demand around the world for gold and silver, mining companies have been absolutely decimated. And it warrants discussion, Andy, because I think there comes a point in the near future where physical gold and silver are going to be much harder to come by because the demand is there, and the miners, the people who day in and day out have to dig this stuff out of the ground, are literally being slaughtered and are going out of business.
Yes, and I mean, this is the supply versus paper thing that was GATA's platform back 15 years ago, and it's more so than ever today. Yesterday, my article was called Supply Response. It said you have the polar opposite in the oil market and most commodity markets and gold and silver. In oil, you have a relentless amount of supply, which is going to just keep going up, 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 and plunging demand. Whereas in gold and silver, you have relentless demand, which keeps going higher, and supply, which is falling off the planet. And again, I worked for the mining industry from 2006 to 2011 before I came to Miles Franklin. That industry was dead when I left in 2011. That was almost 4 years ago. It's far more dead now. There has been no capital spending in this business. There's been no discoveries. There has been, it's like the oil business. All the low-hanging fruit has been plucked. So everything that they do now is extremely difficult. It takes very expensive technology in remote areas with difficult governments and tax regimes. And there's just been no technological talent in the business because it's been suppressed so long. So again, you're talking about there's no money in the business, there's no discoveries, and there's no talent in the business. And anytime gold and silver even have the slightest rise, the governments think of it, oh, it's money, we're going to nationalize it, we're going to windfall tax it, expropriate all that stuff. So the industry is dying. And this week, we just started seeing, I predicted last week mining Armageddon in 2015, where the industry paralyzes. And we've only seen the first few miners come out. I think it was Kinross and Goldfields, an absolute catastrophe. I mean, their stocks are down 15-20% to all-time lows. Their production and outlooks are beyond horrible. And in the next 2 days, particularly tomorrow, we're going to see all the big boys report. And I predict the same. I predict there's going to be absolutely no growth in supply. They'll be lucky if they can even maintain reserves. And again, that push to merge and get rid of even more cost is going to paralyze the industry, and it's going to cause production to collapse. In our Miles Franklin All-Star Silver webinar last year, we said at current prices, particularly if base metal prices continue to weaken, and they've weakened dramatically since that webinar, we could see a 25 to 50% drop in silver production in the next 5 years.
Well, let's talk about gold and silver just a little bit further, because I just want to drive this point home, Andy. Despite all of the insanity that's going on globally, with literally a race to the bottom between these currencies, as you've documented and we document every time we talk, gold and silver on Tuesday were once again gutted. I think silver was down nearly $1. What could possibly explain that, Andy, in a world where there's only bad news? And just to drive the point home further, at $16 an ounce, silver in physical form is now cheaper than the miners pay to pull it out of the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it's far cheaper. You know, it's low 20s just for the largest miners, not all miners, the largest miners, to make a net profit. And if they want to actually maintain the business, meaning like replace reserves and actually stay in business, they need more like $30 an ounce. And that's why the industry is going to completely implode. So, I mean, the outlook for these miners is beyond belief. And, you know, I got off the question a bit. But, you know, I've never seen a situation where there's so much demand out there and they've been able to keep the price, away from where that demand is. But it's no different. You know, today my article was called Sheep to the Slaughter than the stock market or the bond market or any of these manipulated markets. In fact, you asked why on Tuesday it was able to go down. Why? Because it was at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is key attack time number one for the last 20 years. That's when the physical markets close, and it's when the Fed has their open market operations. That's why the Dow had its same dead ringer algorithm yesterday. It has the same exact trading pattern every single day, bottoming at 10 o'clock, just like gold, which tops at 10 o'clock. And now they're so desperate, they even are doing the same thing with crude oil. Every day at 10 a.m. now, it surges higher because they know very well that they can't keep this ruse of a recovery going on if they can't miraculously push the price of oil up and get this horrible $500 billion junk bond finance shale industry off its feet. But again, it won't happen. It's far bigger market than even the gold and silver market is oil and gas. You see it in the Baltic Dry Index. You see the transparency of all the shipments coming from around the world and the demand from around the world, which is plummeting. So they're not going to be able to keep the oil price up. They're not. It's going to fall dramatically from here, no matter what they do. And, you know, unless OPEC is crazy enough to say, sure, shale industry, I mean, we need the money more than you do, but we'll let you take our market share, so we'll cut production. It ain't going to happen. They're going to drive this entire shale business back into the depths of the netherworld. And, and in the process, they're going to kill off any remaining ability that the U.S. government has to mask the collapse of the economy that's going on.
Yeah, that's right. And that is what they've been doing. They've been masking the collapse. Let's round this back to where I started, which is every video should be called "The World is Falling Apart," because it really is. And you've mentioned the Baltic Dry Index twice. Let's tell people how profound it is that the Baltic Dry Index is at a 29-year low. Let's tell people what that means, Andy, because here's the way I see it. When the Baltic Dry Index is at an historic low, and everything has been thrown at this economy since 2008, meaning trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, there are no more outs for the Fed. There are no more easy outs for our economy. What does it mean for the Baltic Dry Index to be at this historic low?
And again, when we say, and the Baltic Dry Index, for people who don't know, it's the most broad measure of global seafaring trade activity, meaning tankers that are taking things around the world. So yes, it's at an all-time low going back to 1986, but only because the index started in 1985. So it probably is at a many year low, or more than 29 years. And again, I mean, on October 7th in that article, and many times since, I've said this is the single lowest point of the global economy of our lifetimes, and that includes if you're an older person. It is the worst point ever. And so the fact that it's that low is just validating exactly what we've been saying all along. There's a reason why that the U.S. crude oil inventories are at an 80-year high. That's 80, meaning the highest they've ever been, because demand is down and supply is up. And the same goes for the Baltic Dry Index, which is not just transporting oil, but all sorts of commodities and goods around the world. So every day that the Fed pretends, and believe me, this little gamut here of trying to push the 10-year rate up so that they can continue maniacally saying, yes, we intend to raise rates by a quarter percentage point sometime later this year. It's not going to work. It's going to kill off any even hope of a recovery. Look at the mortgage purchase and refinancing applications that came out this week, down 15% in 1 week alone, just because the Fed was stupid enough to try to push up rates in front of today's FOMC meeting minutes so they can say that a bunch of governors thought maybe we should raise rates a quarter point sometime later this year. There's not a shred of evidence anywhere that the U.S. economy is recovering. And aside from that unbelievably ridiculous NFP report last month where 2.7 million job losses were converted to a seasonally adjusted 257,000 jobs, and that you had the huge jump in real nominal wages during the month where the PPI had its biggest decline ever. It just shows you that the disconnect is beyond imagination. I've been doing this, tracking all the real numbers for the last year. What I call the island of lies number, which is the unemployment reports, the jobless claims numbers, and the diffusion indices. But you compare them to the real numbers: retail sales, construction output, factory orders, durable goods, personal consumption, down, 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 not even slightly up. Everything is down except the NFP employment report, which shows plunging unemployment rates and surging jobs.
Well, the BLBS report certainly never fails to impress us with its ability to propagandize. Let's just finish this discussion, though, about the Baltic Dry Index, and let's tie it into what's going on in the United States. I'm very concerned about this West Coast port strike. I read a piece on Zero Hedge, Andy, where the average dock worker makes $150,000 or $160,000 a year. These guys are on strike. The ports are closed down, and we're talking about a very fragile economy and a very fragile food delivery system in this country where it's just-in-time delivery. So here's my question, Andy. How big a deal is this West Coast port strike with these ports closed, number one? And how scary is it when we have such a fragile economy and such a fragile just-in-time delivery system?
Well, it's not scary at all. I mean, the Dow's at an all-time high, and so is the DAX when the euro may fall apart this week. We've gotten to the point, again, in this sheep to slaughter article, right now, markets have been so dominated by government algorithms that they can literally ignore all evidence. But the fact is, economic Mother Nature is always lurking in the background, and she always wins. She will cause the supply disruption in the precious metals. She will cause the supply to overwhelm the demand and cause price of oil to fall. And then, it's the whole when it rains, it pours. We got wars going on with ISIS, potentially with Russia. We got dock worker strikes. I mean, who knows what will happen with this dock worker strike? And it's actually, by the way, a lockout. One of my readers let me know. But for whatever reason, if it becomes a long-term thing, I mean, it's a catastrophic economic impact. And hopefully, as you suggest, not anything more than that, like food shortages. But at this point, I'm just going to chalk it up to one of the 10 million black swans that are lurking out there. And, and the giant pink elephant in the room of the reality of a collapsing economy and the reality that things as simple as no debt agreement between Greece and the European Union could cause the end game to start within weeks.
Yes, and that's an excellent segue over to Greece. I want to mention this, though, real quickly. I didn't want to bring Greece up right away because there's so much scary, important things to talk about as it relates to our own nation and the health of our own economy and the health of the pocketbooks of everybody listening who lives in this country that I wanted to start there. I wanted to start with gold and silver. But I got to tell you, Andy, I am just disgusted with what I see as continuous propaganda coming out of the United States government, not only with the BLS report, not only with economic data, which is absolutely unbelievable, but as it pertains to these continued wars of empire around the world. We've got Senator Inhofe releasing fake photos about Russian troops in Ukraine last week. I saw State Department mouthpiece Maria Harf on CNN with Wolf Blitzer on Tuesday night admitting excitedly that the U.S. is vetting Syrian rebels, which is ISIS, as part of a, quote, program to arm them and to work with the United States to call in airstrikes in Syria. It just is so maddening. I wanted to share those two pieces of news before we move on to Greece. Any thoughts on that, or should we talk about Greece?
I mean, it's just more of the same. Government's becoming more draconian, and there's a huge political lobby and a huge economic lobby to bomb.
Yeah,
And so we do it. We bomb everyone and we anger everyone and we destroy cultures and economies and currencies.
yeah, they're love bombs, Andy. I think they're bombs of liberty, is what we're told. But the reality is that more than half now, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 51 cents out of every tax dollar collected goes to the Pentagon. And it's exactly what Woodrow Wilson warned us would happen if we did not rein in the military-industrial complex. Let's talk about Greece. $240 billion in euro bailouts came with more than 400 conditions, including reducing the public sector, shrinking pensions, and lowering the minimum wage. And I guess that offer expires in about a week, Andy. They're just going to continue to string it along with new offers, aren't they? Or where do we stand with Greece?
Well, again, I talk about how the manipulation of markets creates these memes. The MSM will write, well, the stock market is up, so it's expecting a Greek deal. They don't even know what that means, a Greek deal. They don't even know what's being discussed. And they automatically assume because the manipulated stock market is higher, that it must be good. I mean, do people not understand what's going on in Greece? That 240 billion of bailouts, that's more than half of Greece's debt. So when you look back in 2010 and we had the first crisis and they became junk and they had all to do the bailouts and everyone thought everything would fall apart in the derivatives, Greece had half the debt that it has now. That's 4 years ago, not 40 years ago. So all these bailouts have done has created the giant colossus of debt and misery where the unemployment rate has gone from 10% to 26%, the youth unemployment from 25 to 51%, debt to GDP has gone from 110 to 175%. This is because of the bailouts. So they have a stock market is down 80 or 90%. The people are impoverished. It's the worst possible condition. And people think that they just voted in these Syriza people out of nowhere to just say, yeah, why don't we just do more of the same? No, I mean, not read between the lines. Read what they're saying. They're not saying we're going to have a deal. Yeah, they talk politically. They say, yeah, maybe we can get a deal. They're buying themselves some time to prepare, but they don't want a deal. They said we want to get out and we want to write off our debt and we hate you, Germany, and we hate everything that all of Europe has done to us. That's why they were elected. You think this Serpis guy is going to come in 3 weeks and say, oh yeah, Greek people, screw you. You know what I promised you? I'm not going to do it. I just kowtowed to the... No, Greece is a dead nation. They're all dead nations, but Greece is the most dead of all, which is why it's the lowest on the totem pole to go out. So whether they agree this week with, in the last second, because this bailout ends February 28th on an extension, which the extension will do nothing. It's literally would say, yes, your debt, you still owe it to us, but you can pay it to us later, which would be bad for the euro and bad for the whole situation and bad for Greek people and social unrest in Greece. There's nothing good that could come of that, especially because everyone knows that once that extension is done, they're just going to eventually default. If they do what he came into office to do, which is default and get the heck out of that, as they call it, debt colony, you're going to see the end of the euro. I mean, you're certainly going to see the end of the current euro because when they get out, that means they default on the debt. That means that Italy defaults on his debt, that Podemos in Spain takes over like Syriza does in Greece, and they default on the debt, and Beppe Grillo in Italy and Marine Le Pen in France. All of these movements everywhere that Catalonia will eventually push hard and get the hell out of Spain and take its 25% of tax revenues. It's that bad over there. Yeah. But it's only one part of the world. It's no different in Japan. It's no different than in South America. Remember, the average currency is down 40% against the dollar since QE3 and QE4 started 3 or 4 years ago. And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and let me ask you this, Andy, as it relates to the fall of the Eurozone. I was speaking with Alistair MacLeod recently, and he noted that the Eurozone experiment was a step toward a one-world government, a one-world religion, a one-world currency. If the Euro experiment implodes, is that not a good thing for humanity? Or is it an absolute disaster because it's going to cause a derivatives collapse and really a financial Armageddon, the likes of which we've never seen, which would be really horrible?
Well, I never believed any of this one world stuff. I think that in the best of times. Remember when the euro was created was the best of times. It was 1999. It was the top of the stock market. Everyone was happy, and they got together and said, this is great. Why don't we just put our currencies together? We can have the greatest stock market run in all-time history, and everyone will trade and everything. But they didn't think any of it out. They didn't think that there's 25 different cultures and 25 different languages and 25 different trade policies and central banks and all that stuff. And of course, that's when the global economy peaked. Even when they started the Eurozone, a bunch of the nations, even Germany, didn't get its Maastricht Treaty conditions in line. That was back then. Now it's just a complete disaster. And, the thought of a one world isn't even, it's just a matter of every man for himself right now. So I think, of course, in the long run, it's better for humanity because there's no way you could ever have all these individual states put together. And it was proven. It's been a complete and utter disaster from the beginning. And trying to prolong it is going to be impossible because Greece is literally imploding. It's not just like, well, they're in really bad shape. Greece is as bad as it can be, and it's only going to get worse if they stay there with their 400 billion euros of debt and be a debt colony. So, no, of course, it's good in the long run, but in the short run, when the Eurozone breaks, it's going to be a lot of debt defaults, derivatives, plunging economy. We're already in a plunging economy. This is the single worst economy of our lifetime, and we haven't even had these major issues like the actual breakup of the euro. It's going to happen. Will they stave it off with a last-minute deal on February 27th at 11 p.m. and say, yes, we've agreed to extend it for 6 more months? Yeah, maybe they'll do that, but no one's going to believe it's going to change anything. It's certainly not Alexis Tsipras, who was elected to get the heck out.
Right. Okay, well, let's round out the conversation with this last thought. If the euro collapses, if Greece can't be brought back into the fold, if Spain and Italy become issues, if everybody bails and the euro collapses and the derivatives Ponzi begins to implode at an even faster rate, how do the chickens come home to roost for the American people? Because the average American sheeple person, the person that does not pay attention to any of these issues we're talking about, they don't know how bad things are. Because those who are still employed, and as long as there's $5 footlongs and Monday Night Football, everything is A-OK for the average good old boy in this country. And it concerns me because it's every American's duty to keep their government in check. And somehow we let this government go off the rails. So at what point do the chickens come home to roost? Andy, how does that play out?
Well, I was just saying earlier this morning to someone, I don't think that the average person thinks there's nothing wrong. I think the average person has not a clue about how the economy works, and let alone what the Federal Reserve does and the impact it has on financial markets and economies. But I think, based on the home ownership, the entitlements, the labor participation rate, real wages, inflation, all that kind of stuff, everyone knows there's something wrong, let alone when they look around the world and they see what's going on everywhere else. They just don't understand the root causes of it. And, if we can teach them one thing, it's that what the root cause is the bad money that has created a Ponzi scheme, which must die. It can't recover. It can't be because they say, well, we'll grow out of it or we'll manage interest rates. You're past the point of return on a debt standpoint. And so at that point, the only thing that could happen is for the system to die. And it's only a matter of whether it happens quickly or not quickly. I don't really think that there's any way to impact the government, but what you can do is help yourself and help anyone who will listen to protect themselves and get through what will be very difficult times.
That's right. And as I like to say, Andy, we are documenting the collapse. It is happening as we speak. And for listeners, I just want to point out that the first purchase I made of physical silver was 10 10-ounce bars, mostly Johnson Mathey bars, and it was from Miles Franklin. Andy, can you tell people how to do business with you guys if they want to protect themselves with physical precious metal?
Of course, Miles Franklin. We've been around 26 years, one of the largest dealers in the country. Call us at 800-822-8080 or email me at ahoffman@milesfranklin.com.
Guys, thanks so much for listening, and thanks for checking out Andy's work at milesfranklin.com. They have an amazing blog there. Bill Holter, Andy Hoffman, some of the best analysis you're going to read on the internet anywhere. And you can find those articles posted at SGT Report as well. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks for visiting us for real news, truthful news, 24/7. Andy, thanks again.
Very welcome.
Guys, thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.